Hello, it's me again. Thanks for once again tuning in to Level Zero Literacy. This week we're going to cover Parasite Eve, a PS1 horror classic. We're going to spoil the game from beginning to end in this episode, and we're going to discuss a lot of sensitive topics that include, but are not limited to, very extreme body horror, violence involving children, sexual assault, as well as many other things. So please use your best judgment before proceeding. Enjoy!
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Level Zero Literacy. I'm Buck, and I'm joined as always by my co-hosts Sam and Mason.
Hello.
Yep.
And today we are going to be talking about the cinematic RPG, Parasite Eve.
Oh, baby. Definitely one of the cinematic games of all time.
Yeah.
Parasite Eve released in 1998 and was produced by Hironobu Sakaguchi and directed by Takashi Takeda, who both made significant contributions to the Final Fantasy franchise before this game, and composed by Yoko Shimomura, who I bring up mainly to mention that she composed the music for Super Mario RPG probably right before starting to work on this game.
That game has much better music than this game.
Now,
Significantly.
Hold on. I liked the soundtrack of this game, except for the opera.
There's only like 5 songs, though.
No, there's more than that. There's like 12, 13, but like they play the opera so much. That one's like not a banger.
I'm just saying, Super Mario RPG has infinite bangers.
That is true.
This has like 6.
3, maybe 4.
So, Parasite Eve's a hybrid horror RPG game that's designed to be a sequel to the novel of the same name by Hideaki Senna. And not to go off on too much of a tangent, but the book is credited alongside The Ring for revitalizing Japanese horror in the 90s.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
This book and The Ring are what kind of brought Japanese horror back.
So the book is like a major cultural piece.
Yeah.
I'm very surprised by that based on what you've told me about it.
Yeah. The book is a major cultural piece, or at least for 90s horror in Japan.
Sure.
Yeah.
In this game, he plays Ayabrea, a New York City police officer who ends up as the only person able to confront an apocalyptic event that's causing people to spontaneously combust or turn into goo. This game has a pseudo-real-time combat system, almost like the Tales of franchise. And as you play the game, Aya learns various powers, either to harm enemies or buff herself via her mitochondria, which are the powerhouse of the cell.
The powerhouse of the cell.
They evolve 10 times faster than any other part of the human body.
That's true. They're like a parasite that learned to work with the nucleus.
Okay, so we're going to do this episode a little bit differently, because this game is very different than any other game we've talked about so far.
Yeah, so this game's very... A lot of the games we've done so far, the narratives are laid out pretty clearly, or they do very specific character work. But this game is a lot more analytical, as in, a lot of horror games in general tend to have this quality of you have to analyze what's going on what's going on past the surface level to really get to the meat and bones of what the developers were trying to get at.
I think a lot of games that we look at do a lot of work to build robust sort of multi-dimensional characters, and this game isn't really going for good character work. It uses a lot of tropes and a lot of fiction archetypes like the cop, the scientist, that kind of thing in service of provoking thought through the events of the game.
Mm-hmm. And I do kind of, before we get into the next part of the podcast, I do kind of want to emphasize we're going to be talking about some really fucked up shit this episode. Not just the content of the game, which is screwed up in one way, but the content of the book is there's some real bad stuff in there.
I believe it.
Also bad, huh?
So, and I mean, maybe it's obvious due to like the concept of horror, like generally really obnoxious bad things happen in horror media, but this one especially.
It's definitely on a scale, though, right?
Yeah.
You know, the gore, like just like general gore, is like not the same as like horror that's about, you know, sexual assault or things that are much more human
Yeah.
in scale.
We're we're going into the sexual assault when we
I'm
talk
sure
about
we
the
are.
book.
Yeah.
Oh,
That-
great.
I think that play, in the very early like throes of this game where we were getting the flashbacks to the hospital, there was a part of me that felt like that was a part of the story that was going to come up at some point.
I mean, there's definite sexual themes. I thought there might be things in the book about violating like bodily autonomy, not necessarily in a sexual way, because there's a mad surgeon, right? So
Yeah.
they could perform operations to your body. And then there was a lot of separate sexual imagery that specifically had to do with the birth of children. You get to see like a mutant baby kind of explode from it's
Womb.
yeah, it's not really
Makeshift womb.
everything I'm going to say makes it sound like I don't know how a baby is born, but it's different because it's in a cinematic and a fucked up horror game. It's not, you see it like burst from the placenta, but it's like outside and it's face first and it, you know, it's in like an egg sac also kind of.
So, to give readers more information, I read the book, did a little bit of additional research, and played the game. Mason and Sam played the game. So, what we're going to do is we're going to have Mason and Sam talk out how they view this story and what they think it's going to say. And I will pop in with anything relevant and provide more information and context with the book.
You want to start? You want me to start?
Go ahead after you.
Okay. So before I get started, when Mason and I played this game, we kind of couch co-opted it. We named Aya Joan. So if I say Joan instead of Aya at any point, that's why.
We're sorry.
We made her a Midwest.
we mean Aya
small
Brea.
town cop.
We mean Aya Brea, but we might say Joan.
Yeah.
Joan of Arc.
So, to me, what I got out of this game before the ending was I felt like this game was a lot about the ethics of scientific exploration and how humanity will inevitably cause its own collapse, not through I never saw it through the lens of the way Maeda talked about like humans are the parasites on Earth. I saw it through more of like it's just inevitable that humans' desire for creation and understanding will inevitably lead towards their demise. So, you know, we see a lot of this encapsulated in Clamp's character, where Clamp has been working tirelessly for years towards a project that he is fully aware will lead to his own demise. And despite knowing exactly what is going to happen to him as a result of researching this, he is still so encapsulated with going through with his research because he believes it is important for the evolution of the world, of society, or it is like the next logical step of man. And it's really interesting to me because it's not really like, it's obvious that Clamp is an evil person. He's not meant to be played as, you know, a misunderstood character or anything. But
He's wholly unempathetic, right?
exactly. And he's even antisocial, right? I think there, you know, towards the beginning of this game, the people that kind of warn you as you're going into Clamp's office for the first time are like, yeah, he's like basically a shut-in. He never leaves his research office for almost anything unless he absolutely has to. He gets food brought up to him. He basically sleeps in there all the time. So this is a man who's devoted his entire life, his entire time of research, and the seeds of his deeds have been sowed for years. Like, he's been working, you know, he went to a hospital and worked at a hospital specifically so he could take these records and perform experiments on people without their knowledge, essentially, and in the process of working towards the ultimate goal of allowing Eve to create the ultimate being. And so all that to me is really just signifying how much, one, it's important, like there are lines in scientific ethics where it's important to control some aspects of experimentation, because there's no reason for, there's a line where it's like understanding, and then you can step past that and you are actively working towards unraveling a core fabric of society. When you think about like Oppenheimer, when you think about the invention of the atomic bomb, there's a lot, they cross the line of like understanding atomic, concepts, fusion, explosions, whatever, and then turned it into a weapon. It's kind of a similar, to me, there's like a parallel there a little bit. And then the other side of it just being, human ingenuity, human curiosity will eventually just lead to its own destruction as a result of our curiosity will lead us down roads that we shouldn't necessarily go down. And what we find down those roads, we don't walk back from them. We just keep going down until inevitably it's too late for us to turn around and go back. So that, to me, that's what this game was trying to get at, was that science is a fine line to walk, and we need to make sure that we are being careful as humans with, the experiments we do, the things we research, and all that. So,
and I want to say the book does a much better job of kind of making a big point that is one of the big issues it is addressing, because the reason Eve ends up existing as she does in this universe is because of that research.
Yeah. You get kind of a glimpse into it because Maeda tells you about the experimentation that went into the woman in Japan, but it's never really fully explained out to the player.
So do you want me to put in what those experiences is?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So the experiments that Maeda mentions here are, so there's a research scientist focused on cell biology, specifically mitochondria, and his wife. So his wife is possessed is like the most accurate word here, mitochondrial Eve. Her body is trying to fight back, though, and mitochondrial Eve is effectively trying to get rid of the middleman, which is this guy's wife. Her name's Kiyomi. So Eve starts doing these experiments to see how much she can take over Kiyomi's body. And it's kind of hard for her, but the moments she can do it are when Kiyomi and Toshiaki is the name of the scientist are having sex.
Weird.
Yeah, it's weird. And so Eve uses this time to kind of communicate with Toshiaki and put ideas in his head about what's going on with Kiyomi. And Eve also, as she is able to slowly take over Kiyomi's body, she has Kiyomi sign up to be an organ donor. Specifically, this book, I think, was written around the time when there was a big thing going on in Japan about should someone who is declared brain dead be an organ donor? Like, should you take organs from someone who is declared brain dead?
Do you know about what years that might have been?
I have no idea. Okay. This book came out in the 90s. Okay. What happens is Eve starts taking over the body. She forces Kiyomi to sign up to be an organ donor. And while she's doing this, she's setting this up for a few things to happen. She's imprinting into Toshiaki that Kiyomi can effectively live beyond her body being dead. And she's also setting it up so that even if Kiyomi's body dies, she can propagate into something else. Specifically, what ends up happening is she signs her up. I don't know if you can actually do this. This is the weird thing. She signed up specifically to be a kidney donor. And so Eve, one day while Kiyomi is driving, takes over her body, runs her into a pole in the car to kind of kill her body, make her brain dead, and make it so that the kidneys can be transplanted somewhere else. But she puts the idea in Toshiaki's head, hey, take her liver. I don't know what it is. It's something specific about liver cells that I really don't care about explaining here.
Well, so I mean, that's talked a little bit about the game, where in the true ending, you learn that an entire copy of Maya, who is the sister of the protagonist, has been created out of a culture of liver cells that Clamp has been working on.
Yeah, her Maya's liver cells, actually.
Yeah, and I believe the reason that they probably picked the liver cells is because the liver has the highest regenerative rate of any of the body's organs, I want to say. It's either the highest or one of the highest, because I believe I know I've read studies that like your liver can completely rebuild itself if there's only like 30% of it left or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something like that. And so Toshiaki takes the liver, and that's actually what ends up becoming Eve 1. Eve 1 is the original creation of Eve that you don't experience in this book, or not in the game. The kidney ends up going to someone who's very important for this game, and we'll get to that later. The liver cells creating Eve is something that is consistent. Like, Eve has managed to do this to Toshiaki and to Klemp. And so effectively, Eve is the Eve is the nuclear bomb here, right? Eve is, what if this scientist taking this wild idea, crazy idea of taking his dead wife's liver, and he sees this liver as his wife living, and he's experimenting on it, and he's like, oh, these mitochondria are so powerful. This is so great. I can grow these. And what he ends up growing is an eldritch horror.
Absolutely.
Mason, you want to...
So, when I played this game, it made me think a lot back to my childhood, which was the late 90s, early 2000s, right? Now, in the post-World War II era, from like the 40s to the 70s, we made a lot of humanity made a ton of scientific advancements. Humanity learned a ton of stuff, and then throughout the 80s and 90s, it was making its way into public consciousness. It was making its way into the science books, right? Now, I don't know exactly when Watson and Crick figured out the shape of DNA. When was that? Do you know?
It was 70s-ish.
Yeah, that
I
sounds
think.
right.
It does sound right. Don't quote any of us.
Yeah, don't quote.
I used to teach science, but I don't.
But yeah, things that previously were unknown or just being researched start making their way into public consciousness and start to inform a lot of people about, where we came from, what our place on the earth is, what our place in the universe is. And to a lot of people, it was tremendously scary. To a lot of religious people, it was obviously enough to flip their ideology on its head. To a lot of people who thought they had a very good idea of what the world was, a very solid worldview, it could be very upending. And I think this is to me, this read like a meditation on all of the various ways that science could be like pretty horrific in that sort of post World War II advancement era, right? Like we have all the hits from that time. A doctor can shoot a laser in your eye and fix it, or take an organ out of someone and put it into you. Like, does that make you? Does that make them a little part of you? These collections of bones that we found underground were now starting to be given life by the research we were doing on them, which, like, as a sort of visual metaphor in the game, right, the dinosaurs literally will come to life, right? We learned so much about these things that now we can make definitive statements about when they lived, and it's just like an imperceptibly long time ago. These ways of thinking that had been in our brains since, maybe the Middle Ages were dying off. And again, to go back to visual metaphor, the first thing you see in the game is a play that seems to take place in the Middle Ages where all the characters die off, right? There was like this very quick progression of human knowledge, and it created this zeitgeist of fear of science. And to me, this game, like, brought to life all the different things that people found most scary, right? And, I could go on and on. We had new weapons that could be concealed and kill people incredibly quickly, finding their ways into, like, it's not just like in the Wild West anymore. You can find that on like some East Coast metropolis, right? And, we have the cops commenting on gun control and things like that. That was a lot of what I read into the events of the game. That was what, and I know I had read somewhere online that the game was developed in California with a partnership with Squaresoft, right?
Yeah, this is the first Square game that had like a major collaboration with the West.
And it seemed very, very American in a lot of the portrayals and attitudes and themes I saw in the game, because it sort of harkened back to a lot of things I remember about my childhood, like the remnants of these sort of cultural shifts that people were still talking about when I was a kid in like the early 2000s, right? And, to some people it's not, the fears aren't completely assuaged, and now we have some people who were born completely after this, and it's all just very normal to them. But back in the time that this game takes place in, this was all fresh and new and scary. So that's what it felt like to me.
Yeah, and I'm kind of inclined to agree with that. The book in particular, it goes super in depth to a lot of the scientific process of like cells and reproduction and research, like cell reproduction, research, those kinds of things. And a lot of it tries, the book itself, this game, a lot of the like horror is from the grotesque body horror. Funny story, when I was like 7 or 8, and I'm guessing because it has to be realistic, this game came out in 98. I was probably 7 years old. I was visiting family, and my uncle who played video games, who really got me into video games, he was playing this game, and I was a little kid. I was like, I want to watch. And he's like, you probably shouldn't. I was like, I'm going to watch anyway. He's like, okay. And he just started the game, and the rat cutscene happens.
The very first thing.
Yeah.
And if you haven't seen this, I personally recommend playing this game, if only to see what a year of difference in the Final Fantasy VII engine is.
Yeah, oh my God. It's night and day.
Like, Final Fantasy VII was released 14 months before this game, and it uses the Final Fantasy VII engine. And this game, these cutscenes just look... I didn't realize they were the same engine because of how much better this game looks. Like, when I say better, I mean like...
It still looks like a game from 1998.
But the cutscene, the CGI is
For the time.
the CGI for the time, like when you stack it up at 2 Final Fantasy VII, which maybe has one cutscene, I think that even is close to the level, and that's the Bugenhagen orrery, and even that, it's like the level of detail is like not there. These scenes were like super good.
Oh yeah. Like that rat. I've had that cutscene ingrained in my brain for my whole life. And there's not, and when I say as many, there's like one scene like that in the book. Everything else about the horror of the book is trying to understand what Eve actually is.
It's almost more psychological.
Yeah, exactly. The book is a lot more psychological and, approaches the scientific way a lot more than I think the game manages to like pull out of you.
I have a kind of a hunch that this game was much more about what it could show you than what it could tell you, because they already had a book of stuff that they could tell you, and all the characters are kind of one note, and the writing is just very like this gets you to this, gets you to this, but the cinematics, they almost seem like they're out of a different game entirely than the writing, because they're so much more imaginative and evocative, and there's so much more imagery than there ever is in just the gameplay, which almost serves just to be a vessel for these cutscenes in a way. It's not like entirely like that, but the cutscenes are like far and away the best attribute of the game. Do you guys agree?
I agree.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Except for, I kind of like the way Daniel's relationship with his son evolves throughout the game. I wish there was more of it, but beyond like watching that happen, the cutscenes are, like, in my opinion, easily the best part of the game.
I mean, the character work didn't really grip me, because they let a lot of stuff hang, and like a lot of stuff is like gesturing towards like ideas and tropes and archetypes that exist in other fiction.
Yeah, there's actually just very little dialogue in the game.
There really is.
It's really weird to me.
I think the most dialogue happens between the police chief and Daniel and Aya.
Well,
it's all expository,
and all the cutscenes are just visually, played out. There's no dialogue in any of those. There's no voice acting, really.
There doesn't need to be, right? Because there's there's quote unquote voice acting in that there's like a baby crying at one point, but that's the closest, or like an opera singer.
Those stupid baby noises will be ingrained in my head forever.
It's awful, dude.
Because we have how many times we had to see that cutscene.
That's stupid. Ultimate being. But like all the juice in this game, to me, was squeezed out of the cutscenes. That was the part that gripped me. Was like, there's crocodiles in the sewers of New York. And one has become bipedal and is like 8 feet tall, and coming in, his like mouth is splitting apart, and you see the sinew and the muscle, and it's like, so you can tell, like someone spent tons of time getting that just right. Or the rat, or the people, like there's a scene with like 50 people spontaneously combusting, and they're like falling all over each other trying to run away, and they're falling out of the balcony and stuff. Like just abject horror, just conveyed so effectually in the CGI.
And I'm not sure any other horror game has really pulled something like this, had really pulled something off like this before this point. Because when did Resident Evil 2 come out?
I don't know, probably like 94, 95 kind of zone. Resident Evil 3 was on the Dreamcast, so that was later.
Oh my god, why is remake coming up when I Google?
Well,
1998, same year.
Same year. So like a few months before this.
So it was being developed in tandem, right? They had the same
in tandem. And like RE1 is a scary game, but I don't think it had any image. I don't recall it having any imagery.
Well, it was FMV. RE1 was FMV game.
This kind of imagery being in a video game, I think, was very new at this point. I'm hoping and saying, please don't yell at me if I'm wrong.
There's a reason. There has to be a reason that this game is stuck around as a cult classic, despite being, let's be honest with ourselves, like a pretty middling game quality wise.
Yeah,
to like
gameplay wise,
to like maybe a little below par.
Yeah,
And it probably innovated so robustly in that area.
This game got a lot of 7s, and like this is when 7s actually meant like a 7.
Yeah, like
not...
pretty good.
Hey, it's me popping in for the mid-roll ad. Well, it would be an advertisement if I didn't keep emailing potential advertisers threatening emails. Anyway, I'm just here to remind you to like, comment, subscribe, and share on all of our social media feeds. You can find links to them at linktree/level0literacy. I really need this podcast to pop off because I did take a loan against Buck's house. So if you could do that. Anyway, I'll throw you back to the pod.
Yeah, so I'd like to add a little bit of context to the story now, since we already discussed in the book part the creation of Eve. I'd like to talk about what happens after Eve is made. Double warning on almost any bad thing you can think of.
Listeners, use your best judgment before proceeding. I know I told you in the pre-show roll, but please, God, just take a deep breath. Think about this.
All right. So, Eve is made. And what she ends up doing is she ends up actually taking over the body of one of the students studying under the researcher who made her. And she's presenting at a talk, and she ends up needing to present a talk for like a college stuff. She rehearses it really well, but when she goes to do it, Eve takes over and gives a talk about the mitochondria taking over the Earth, very similar to what you hear in the game.
Sure.
Everybody's really confused. The researcher, Toshiaki, is yelling at her to get out of his student, and she says, "Okay, I will." And she just starts climbing, this goo starts climbing out of her throat. And comes up, and she starts lighting people on fire, very much like the first scene in the thing. Very funny thing, the student who was taken over survives this whole thing.
That's good.
Incredible.
Yeah. she gets like 3rd degree burns and has to have skin grafted on, but she's
alive.
Can I small aside here? It feels pretty purposeful to me that Eve only overtakes the body of women.
Yes.
Right? So can we talk about like why that is? Do you have any ideas? Or?
She's Eve.
So
if she was taking over men, she'd be Parasite Adam.
Yeah, come on, give me.
So to give you some context for it, the concept of mitochondrial Eve it's a real scientific concept where I don't know how much water it holds. It came around in the 80s, where mitochondrial DNA are only passed matrilineally.
Oh, okay.
So
it's a chromosome thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be. So Eve has to take over women.
Yeah.
Or she can't pass herself forward.
Well, and even in the game, it's sort of lightly alluded to because in her first attempt, it was the man's mitochondria that fought back and prevented, the sperm cells of the man she tried to use to create the ultimate being fought back and was what ultimately destroyed it.
Yeah. And that is how this book ends. Because, by the way she got those sperm cells, doing a weird eldritch horror sexual assault on the guy.
Well, I think I like the way it happened in the game better than. Speaking of which, the way it happened in the game really speaks to my theme, because really new technology in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah. Artificial insemination.
Yeah, in vitro and fertilization.
So we kind of jumped around there. So the goo hops out of the student, and Toshiaki chases the goo to the lab to try to figure out what was happening, where he was growing Eve. He gets there. He is indeed sexually assaulted. And she takes his sperm to go to the 14-year-old girl who the kidney was transplanted into.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
I won't go into any graphic detail. The ultimate being is born almost instantaneously after being grown in the 14-year-old girl.
Yeah. Yeah.
14-year-old girl survives this, but and pretty much the thing Sam said happens to the ultimate being in the book. Because she took the man's sperm, and because there are things that could have happened with the mitochondria, so mitochondrial Eve couldn't create the perfect ultimate being with a human sperm. Effectively, Toshiaki ends up actually commanding the ultimate being. He's like, "Come here, ultimate being. We can be friends." And effectively, he and the ultimate being fuse, and so he
Dragon Ball
dies,
style.
and the ultimate being also dies because of their fusion.
Interesting.
So that 14-year-old girl is Aya and Maya's.
Okay. Yeah. So this is alluded to in the events of the game, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In several places.
So that 14-year-old girl, it seems, ended up exactly like Toshiaki's wife, Kiyomi. Her body was taken over by mitochondrial Eve eventually. And she and Maya ended up in a car accident. Their organs were donated. Maya's liver was taken by Klemp.
Yep.
And the kidney by Melissa.
Yep, the kidney by Melissa. And
The cornea.
The cornea by
by
Aya.
the cornea by Aya, where Aya was, the person able to, that's why Aya is the person able to fight against Eve in this situation, is for some reason her body focused on cooperation.
Synthesis.
Yeah, like symbiosis instead of like mitochondrial domination. And that's why Aya is the protagonist of this story.
And the reason they sort of put that concept forward is that her body is trying to synergize with the cells of her sister or something. It's something you don't get to learn unless you do the true ending, quote unquote. But that's kind of how they explain it.
Yeah. We did not go for the true ending because it's an enormous chore.
But I watched it. It's not as cool as the regular ending.
Yeah, the normal ending, the new game ending, I thought was much better. The true ending just sounded like a bunch of exposition.
Yeah, it was just a bunch of exposition. It was so I was really curious reading this because I like y'all's interpretation, but I have the problem of I think Maeda's monologue is what they wanted you to get out of this story.
So me and Mason talked about this before we started recording, and he brought up that there's a lot of imagery in this game about climate change, and in concept it's like the mitochondria are evolving 10 times faster than everything else, so the mitochondria are like humans and the nucleus is like the earth, and everyone spontaneously combusting is like the earth overheating. So those are all very easy parallels to draw. Easy lines.
Well, they're not
to connect.
easy, but they did it anyway.
Yeah.
It's all kind of a stretch.
So that imagery is there for sure. And I don't know if I don't want to call it disappointing, but it definitely feels like a cop-out sort of right at the end to take away the player's ability to interpret it more openly in favor of a more direct. It's the same issue I had at the end of Metal Gear Solid 1, where I understand that there might be some players that don't necessarily get the message, but having a character in your game directly tell the players what your game is about just leaves like a really sour taste in my mouth.
And so, like, what I kind of find interesting in this story, right, is I think there's a real subtext that if you reach really hard to get is that cooperation is a lot more important than antagonism.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, so there's the scene where Maeda is talking to some police officers, and one starts speaking to him in Japanese to try to figure out what's going on, and then another dude says something racist and gets caught on fire.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And
Very funny. Very cool.
Best
thought that
cutscene
was-
in the game.
I
Awesome.
thought that was hilarious. And then ultimately the way the actual this happens throughout the game, and it's like culminated in the final boss fight where Daniel and Maeda are arguing about Maeda handing Maya
Useless crap.
useless crap,
Which he has done a lot.
which he has done a lot in the game.
It is not an unfounded fear by Daniel.
Yeah, it's not. But after you fight through a few phases of the ultimate being, and it seems like there's no end to it, what Maeda was trying to give you this time was bullets with Aya's cells in them to help fight against the ultimate being. And Daniel, ultimately deciding that instead of fighting against Maeda, he needs to just trust him. He takes a literal leap of faith out of a helicopter. And by the way, if I had to pick a moment, it would be this.
It's a sick cutscene. It goes so hard. It goes so hard.
Daniel takes these bullets that Maeda had made, jumps out of a helicopter,
Hundreds of feet in the air.
hundreds of feet in the air, throws the bullets to Aya. He catches on fire because no one else can fight the ultimate being because of the mitochondrial resonance that causes him to catch on fire, and he just lands in the ocean. Aya catches the bullets, and you can use Maeda's gun for something useful.
And he survives.
And
Somehow.
he
The
does-
best part of this is they didn't make another Daniel model with fucked up clothes. So he appears in the final cutscene with a perfectly pristine suit, a tie, and just like normal, like he was just on fire for like full body on fire for like probably 5 seconds in that cutscene.
And then in the ocean.
Yeah, and then fell into the ocean from like 300 feet in the air, which would probably be like falling straight into cement. And then he's just like, "Hey, I'm here. What's up, guys? Where's my son?"
And and like part of me really wants to take that the message is like pseudo anti-colonialism / we should be much more focused on cooperating with each other than
I don't think it's
antagonizing each other, because like Eve, the antagonist of this game, is clearly like, it's clear that her trying to take advantage of this symbiotic relationship is like the bad thing
Yeah,
in this story, right?
I don't think it's an invalid reading. There's definitely a supremacy angle. She looks upon the other human. Eve looks upon the other humans with like contempt, right? I think that's a perfectly valid conclusion to draw.
I don't think you decide to name your child the ultimate being if you're not a little racist.
A little racist to humans, to all non-evolved humans.
Let's actually talk about the ultimate being, because like what do y'all think they're trying to say with, so like in the book, to me the ultimate being made a little bit more sense, because the point of the ultimate being in the book was Eve viewed herself as like a perfectly, fully, highly evolved thing. Very, very race supremacy idealism. And what her idea behind the ultimate being appeared to be, I am a mitochondria. I don't have everything I particularly need to keep my body stabilized. That's Eve's whole thing in the book, is she can't do it herself, so she needs some sperm to make the ultimate being and to have humans birth the ultimate being, which I think is incredibly hilarious, to think that you're some advanced life form when you literally can't reproduce without going through human reproduction in like the worst way possible.
If I may. So the ultimate being to me was like using the framing device of a video game boss to try and wrap up like what is truly scary about mitochondrial Eve, which is the very fast evolution and then the progression from something that is recognizable vaguely into this like unknowable, like horrible thing
It looks like
can't be reasoned with and just wants to eradicate you.
it reminds me of Chaos from the original Sonic Adventure game.
It reminded me of that too. Visually, definitely.
Visually, yeah. Well, and a little bit evolutionarily as well.
Yeah.
Because Chaos in that game, I'm not a big Sonic fan.
He starts as like a
He
little
starts as like just kind of like
Sonic-sized guy,
yeah,
and then he
humanoid.
grows into a giant monsoon.
Yeah, he goes through forms where he becomes more and more monstrous.
But like, you know, the ultimate being when it's birthed is this like, it looks like a baby and sounds like a baby, not entirely, right? The sound is a little weird, and it's got like wings and stuff. And as it progresses through its forms, it changes through these things that like look less and less like a human and more like something that wants to kill you, right? So it grows these like wings that shoot lasers, and then it gets this long prehensile stinger tail, and then eventually it's just this amorphous blob with a skull floating in it that can shoot lasers from cells that detach itself from its body but are still part of it. It's like when, you know, it harkens back to what Klemp was talking about in the museum, where he's like, yeah, the mitochondria evolve so like rapidly that you can't even wrap your head around it, right? They're so energetic. They progress so quickly that it's scary. And then so they wanted to use like a game mechanic, something that was going to be in their game anyway, to kind of help the player wrap their head around this. That's what I thought about the ultimate being. And I think the fight is fine. Either you're Buck and you're leveled really well and you liberate and you kind of trivialize it, right? Or you're underleveled like we were, and it's really difficult because the ultimate being moves just absurdly fast. So I don't know that it's the best designed, or I don't know that they did a good job getting you to the ultimate being at a power level where it feels like an adequate challenge.
To kind of address the game design here, I do think it is quite bad to have an unclear point of no return where you can't go grind in a JRPG. I have multiple big issues with that, because they don't even make it clear that it's a point of no return when you get triggered into that, because it's after you fight Eve, right? Yeah. Like, as soon as you fight Eve, you literally cannot grind anymore. And that's a little bit obnoxious, I think.
They do tell you there is a point of no return. It's not like they don't warn you, but it is frustrating from an RPG perspective.
Our perspective, Sam and mine's perspective when we played the game, was they're giving us a point of no return for Eve, but we knew there was another day, an entirely different day in the game. Yeah. Not that it would be one contiguous series of events, and that the changing of the day would just happen in the middle of that.
Yeah.
So we were like, oh, certainly we're going to have some more time to wrap up stuff if we want to. Yeah. I don't think we would have, though. I mean, Eve took us, 3 tries?
Eve took us 3 tries, and the ultimate being took us 7.
Yeah.
For context for the viewers, Eve took me 1 try, and the ultimate being took me twice.
Humble brag.
Look at this fucking guy. You believe him?
Real humble brag hours.
Disgusting. What about you, Sam? Ultimate being? Any thoughts?
No, I think you kind of wrapped up what I would have said. It's meant to just be a very fast evolutionary line of something that is unrecognizably horrific. And I think it plays into all of our theories, right? As far as scientific exploration, denial of scientific evidence, and growth, and antagonism.
Yeah, and it's very... I'm actually glad you brought this up, Mason, because I actually thought the Ultimate Being boss was stupid. I was like, this is a stupid video game boss.
Yeah, but it's 98. They got to have a final boss, right?
I think the problem is you do this very interesting, evocative fight with Eve, who you have been clashing with throughout the entire game.
Mm-hmm.
And for the game to just kind of throw this, I don't want to say slapdash, because you can tell it was like very clearly thought out and designed, but it doesn't feel...
They didn't execute as well as Eve.
I think the biggest disappointment to me is that neither of the final bosses you have options to fight in this game really feel fulfilling to the story that they're telling.
If the game had ended at Eve, that would have been huge. Or if they had wrapped it up after the Eve fight, and you stopped the birth of the Ultimate Being, and maybe there's like a little bit more beforehand on Eve.
I think it even would have been more interesting if on day 6, rather than fighting the Ultimate Being, you have to like clean up all of this refuse around the Statue of Liberty to prevent, the Ultimate Being coming to fruition. That to me, because the act of like cleaning up would even make more sense with the narrative they're trying to tell of, this is about like climate change and the danger humanity presents to itself. That would make more sense to me than final boss, big final Shinra boss.
I think that they probably, so you know how I was saying earlier, the gameplay seems like a vessel to carry you the cutscenes. I think they probably had the idea for the cutscene of the Ultimate Being coming out of the placenta and climbing on the boat, and they were like, well, we don't want to scrap this. It's a really good idea for one of these scenes, so we'll make a fight for this.
I mean, the Ultimate Being related cutscenes were very good.
They were. I'm not saying they weren't. They were great. The goo man like creating the shield around like Eve, and like Eve making the second form with the hands that just hug her pregnant belly, and like the placenta like floating on the water with the baby face, like you see it like kicking around in there. Like they're really good. It's just the execution on that last bit just kind of falls. The game definitely starts to fall flat post Eve fight, right? Or maybe even post Ultimate Being cutscene, because you have the Ultimate Being fight, and then you have Maeda's little monologue like, human beings are the real parasites. And it's like, ew.
Yeah, I will say that chase scene after you fight the Ultimate Being through the ship.
My biggest annoyances with this game were these stupid timed sequences where it's not visually clear what you're supposed to be doing. The first game over I got was right after the spider fight on top of the hospital, and it's like, oh no, the plane's about to crash in the hospital. I was like, okay, I'm going to jump into the giant hole that the spider left, because clearly that's the most obvious thing to do. And then I was like, I did it once. I was like, all right, I'm looking up a guide. It's like, oh yeah, you have to go find this thing that's off screen and go down that.
During the chase scene, Sam had like pulled up a guide, and he's like, we're not doing the Ultimate Being fight again. He's like, okay, turn left, go north, go through this door, don't stop at this.
So here's something that I think is interesting generationally between us. I knew where to go. I think it's because I'm so used to looking at pre-rendered backgrounds. I know what to look for where to go.
It's like it's like in a Scooby-Doo background, the book that's the different colors. So you're like, oh, Fred's gonna pull that one out, and the bookcase is gonna move.
The issue for me was that sometimes the things that you would be looking for wouldn't even be displayed on the screen.
Oh yeah, because there is a
time constraint. I feel like the The issue is that the punishment doesn't match
Right.
the difficulty. Where like your punishment for failing these things a lot of times is like having to redo an entire boss fight and watch a bunch of cutscenes.
Yeah.
If the cutscenes were skippable, it would be forgivable, but they're
they'd be
not.
fine.
They're not.
It's like,
Yeah.
I have to watch all this stuff again, do this whole fight again, just because I missed like a time attack event.
That was really that was most of the friction during the Ultimate Being fight. Is there's a lot of dialogue and cutscenes right before.
Yeah, it was. Full disclosure, I got through on the second attempt. I was save stating every phase.
Oh,
This
yeah, we were playing on
guy,
console.
this
We're
guy,
playing on console.
you have no leg to stand on
Different
talking about
experience.
us. Oh my
Oh,
god, you believe him?
Emulator,
I
a little emulator ass.
Emulating ass over here.
sorry, my PlayStation 1 is put away. I do have a PlayStation 2 plugged in because we're playing Metal Gear Solid 2 next. But
Oh yeah,
Hell yeah.
I didn't want to. I can't play on real hardware and spend time with my wife at the same time.
Yeah, that's fair.
Anybody else have anything prescient?
I think you should play this game if you like old era RPG mechanics. Otherwise, I think you can kind of just watch the cutscenes, the story of the game, and you'll kind of get the same.
This is
effect.
this is a game for a specific type of person.
Yeah.
And it's like, older
It's old.
games,
And
or
it's
like cult horror. Cult horror. This is like probably your jam.
it's not just an older game. It isn't like a very good older game. Like
It's not a Final Fantasy VII.
yeah, it's not. And like I'm saying this as someone who loves this game. I love this game. I really like playing this game. It not only is it not for everyone, it is for a smaller section of than not everyone.
I think if you're in the target, demographic for this game, it's gonna hit so hard though. For the person who is a Parasite Eve guy, like it's gonna be so good. I think because like even as someone who thought the gameplay was like there were a lot of things I found very impressive. I don't want, this is a lot. It's not like Dragon Age level, like Misery, there was a lot of stuff that was like really cool that they were, like even compared to today's games, a lot of like clearly groundbreaking type of stuff in here.
All right. Well, this has been Parasite Eve. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, subscribe.
Next episode is going to be as Buck alluded to, Metal Gear Solid 2. So if you are following along game wise, that's going to be our next stop.